Hey everyone, Damien the Kung Fit Coach here. So which one is really better? Weights, bands, or both together? Let's find out. First, let's mention the science. When it comes to muscle growth, it doesn't matter if you're using a rubber tube, a chunk of iron, or your dog. As long as your muscles have some resistance against which they can work, it's going to stimulate muscle growth. There are obviously a number of other factors that play into this, but that resistance is the main thing. Just in case you're not sold, a 2019 meta-analysis found that strength gains were the same with both resistance bands and weights, though they didn't look at the use of dogs. None of this means that there aren't differences between how you should be using weights and bands if you want to get the most out of your workouts though. So if you want to be efficient, get the biggest gains out of the smallest amount of time, stick around and find out how you should be using each. Okay, so let's talk weights. When you want to replicate a real world situation where you have to lift a heavy object against gravity, weights are fantastic. Look at a squat, deadlift or carry, and they all replicate picking up something heavy in the real world, which is a useful thing to train for. Even a bicep curl at its maximum point of resistance, where you're horizontal and the weight is furthest away from you, is just like carrying a heavy box. Bear in mind that the strength of your muscles varies across their range of motion, and some positions are simply mechanically more difficult. You can use this to your advantage with weights, but it can also be a disadvantage. Squats are a great example. The bottom part is the hardest part of the exercise, but a weight has even resistance across the motion. With a band, meanwhile, the bottom part has the least resistance, and it increases the further you stand up. You could argue that this makes bands better for squats, but the only way to improve in that difficult bottom range of motion is to work the muscles in that position. So we want to use weights and accept that we may need to use a little bit less weight, or simply that sometimes exercise is hard. Weights are also better for pushing exercises like the bench press. Whether using a barbell or dumbbells, you can get more stability, a better grip, and the right path. With bands, you can get pulled offline, and you have to worry about fiddling around to get the exact right length to get the right tension throughout the movement. At this point, you're probably thinking, well, bands suck, but hold your horses, or your dogs. None of these exercises are really suitable for bands, because bands are best when you can adjust the distance between yourself and the anchor point, or easily change the length of the band, allowing you to get the right resistance. Also, let's not forget the huge advantage of bands. They are light and portable, which means you can take them anywhere and still get a good workout. I know I'm certainly going to be making use of them soon when I have to spend 2 weeks in quarantine for some international travel. Is there any situation where bands are actually better than weights though? The answer is yes. If you want to move in a direction other than against gravity, bands are your answer. A weight can only drag you down. Bands can drag you up, back, or forwards. You can do this with a cable machine, but they're big and they're expensive, whilst bands are small and cheap. Bands also allow you to easily work muscles which are so much harder to work with weights, such as your gluteus medius. This is really best worked with something like a banded squat walk. Equally, when you want resistance throughout a muscle's range of motion, bands can be the best way to do this, because you aren't limited to the direction of gravity. With lateral raises, for example, the resistance only really starts partway through when you're using a weight. With a band, you can get resistance through the full range of motion, and even get an extended range of motion beyond what you'd get with a weight by crossing the body, giving you more stimulus for growth and strength throughout the muscle's complete range of motion. Because the tension of a band increases as it lengthens, it can also be useful when you want certain parts of an exercise to be made easier. With skull crushers, the hardest part is when you're at full bend, and this exercise can be a little bit tough on the elbows. But with bands, you can make that the easiest part, but still have enough resistance in the band to tax you at your endpoint. Bands are also good for safety. Moves such as dumbbell flies that can easily cause you injury if you lose control of the weight. With bands, you can simply let go. On a related note, explosive movements are also better with bands. You can go as hard as you want and not risk injury, but still have that extra resistance. This is great for building power. Finally, bands can be used to actually assist you, reducing the resistance that you have to overcome rather than adding resistance. For example, if you're struggling with pull-ups, you can use a band to help you get up to the top. So bands have their uses too. Where does this leave us? Well, we use bands for exercises that are best done with bands, and we use weights for exercises that are best done with weights. But we can also use them in combination. When we think about the fact that an exercise's difficulty varies across its range of motion, we can find those bits that are easier and we can fill in those gaps with the added resistance provided by a band. For example, with a bicep curl, which gets easier as you near the top, adding a resistance band makes that last bit just that little bit harder without adding extra difficulty at the start of the motion. With squats, the top part is again the easiest, and by adding bands we can make it harder without increasing the difficulty of the hardest bottommost part. Bands can also be used to force your stabilising muscles into working harder, ensuring that they're properly engaged and making sure they get strengthened too. So there you have it. If you use both bands and weights, you can get the most efficient workout and build power, stability and strength through your full range of motion. If you've never used bands before, give some of these ideas a go. There's some links down below where you can get a set of bands that will be a really good starting point for you. Remember, hit subscribe, obviously give that like button a good hard Marbu punch if you've enjoyed this video, and I shall see you in the next one.